Now moving to our next speaker, Olivier from France. He is the head of the liver unit and coordinator of the Rare Liver Disease French Network. The topic he will be covering will be the non-invasive assessment of PSC progression. Olivier.
So thank you, and of course, oh, there is some trouble. Great. So first of all, of course, I'd like to thank the PSC partners for inviting me. It's really great to be there and to share with you what I know of non-invasive tools in PSC. So here are my disclosure. And in this short talk, I'll consider three broad categories. First, elastography that allows liver stiffness quantification, and vibration control transient elastography is the most popular, at least in Europe, but magnetic resonance elastography is the other main technique. Second, serum biomarkers of liver fibrosis, including, of course, the ELF score, and third, abdominal imaging with MRI. So these tools could be used, of course, in the everyday care, but also in clinical trials. And in these trials, risk stratification is crucial for the design of these trials. And maybe some of these tools are potential surrogate endpoints, but this issue will be addressed by Cyril tomorrow morning. So let's start with liver stiffness. And as we know, liver stiffness is a validated non-invasive surrogate marker for hepatic fibrosis in a number of chronic liver diseases, and performing best at extremes of histological stages. For example, in PBC, so the other main cholestatic disease, we found a nice correlation between liver stiffness and histological fibrosis stage, as shown here. But even more important, liver stiffness has a strong prognostic ability, as shown here. Patients with low liver stiffness value has a much better prognosis than people with elevated values. And whatever the technique used, we should bear in mind that elastography provides information from a much larger portion of tissue compared with liver biopsy. And so let's start with VCTE, that used by the FibroScan device, so first developed in Europe, and results are expressed in kilopascal. And as shown here, FibroScan measures the velocity of an elastic shear wave propagating through the liver. And this shear wave is generated by a vibrator within the FibroScan probe, but it's penless. And the stiffer the tissue, the faster the shear wave propagates. So as shown here, FibroScan is easy, rapid, cheap, and can be performed at the bedside. And here an example of the results. You can see on the screen the result of one measurement, 1.56 kilopascal here. But there are some technical issues And correct interpretation must consider recommendations from the manufacturers. That means at least 10 valid measurements, a success rate higher than 60%, and interquartile range median ratio value less than 30%. And patients should fast for at least 2 hours. And limitations include failure or unreliable results roughly in 15%, mostly due to limited operator experience and obesity. And in this setting, the Excel probe could be useful. So what are the results of FibroScan in PSC? So, as expected, we found a good correlation between liver stiffness and histological fibrosis stage. And as shown in this table, a good diagnostic accuracy for F3, that means extensive fibrosis with a cutoff around 10 kilopascal, and F4, that means cirrhosis, with a cutoff around 15. And even in terms of intent to diagnosis, that means taking into account a rate of 10% of technical failure or unreliable results in this series. And we also found a good reproducibility between operators and between two adjacent intercostal spaces, as shown here. And in terms of prognosis in this large series with around 170 patients with a mean follow-up of 4 years, the FibroScan has a strong prognostic value. And these results have been confirmed by the Hamburg group, and I thank Chris for providing these slides. And it's liver stiffness at a baseline, but also longitudinal change have a strong prognostic value. So if your liver stiffness increase by more than 1.3 every year, the prognostic is less good. And this prognostic value is independent from bilirubin. But of course, full validation is required, and many of you are aware of the ongoing FICUS study, that it is an international multi-center study with almost 600 patients included at this time. But by now, I'd like to stress the importance of strict conditions when performing a FibroScan, and we recommend double checking every time a marking increase is found. And this study also provided insights on the natural course of PSC, and as shown here, modelization found a significant and exponential increase over time from F2 to F4. And another way to express these results is shown here, with the expected rate of cirrhosis according to fibrosis stage at baseline. And there is a clear difference, as expected, between people with only minimal fibrosis and people with intermediate or severe fibrosis at baseline. So the other technique of elastography is MRE, and you can get very nice picture. And results are also expressed in kilopascal, but you have to, there is a a conversion factor of 3 when compared with FibroScan value. Advantages include very large sampling because it explores almost the entire liver, a low failure rate and good applicability in obese patients, and a better accuracy than a FibroScan for grading steatosis and fibrosis in NASH. And limitations include reduced availability, at least in Europe, high cost and time consuming, and some variability in parameters across series. But in PSC, MRE could be performed at the same time as MR cholangiography without adding a significant amount of cost or time. And experience with PSC has been recently reported by the Mayo group, and again, the authors found a correlation with liver stiffness and histological stage of fibrosis, especially for cirrhosis, but the number of patients was only 20. And in a large cohort of 250 patients, they found that liver stiffness was able to stratify patients in low, medium, and high risk for decompensation. So a strong prognostic value, but note that many events occurred very early in this series. So at this point, I'd like to make some comment on liver stiffness, because as already mentioned, there are some confounders in terms of fibrosis staging. That means giving falsely elevated values. And among these confounders, I want to focus, as already mentioned by Gideon, on inflammation and cholestasis, and especially on dominant issue with mild cholestasis, and it's a major issue in PSC, and it has been shown that successful stenting of dominant stenosis may induce a dramatic decrease in liver stiffness. So liver stiffness mainly reflects fibrosis, but not only. But as cholestasis in inflammation are likely to be major players in the course of PSC, it may turn to an advantage in terms of prognostic value. And finally, there are other ultrasound-based techniques for elastography, point shear wave elastography, and 2D shear wave elastography, but very few data is available in PSC at this time. So to sum up this part, more data is available with FibroScan, and last year the EASL stated that non-invasive assessment of liver fibrosis using FibroScan should be considered in PSC, but with an intermediate level of evidence. And the international PSC study group, through a consensus process, stated that FibroScan could be a potential surrogate marker, still not validated. And to mention the title of this editorial, no, I don't think that a FibroScan is a magic wand because of its limitation, but I really think that it's a very useful tool. So let's move to serum fibrosis marker, and especially to the ELF score. that is based on circulating markers of hepatic matrix metabolism, namely hyaluronic acid, TIMP1 and P3P. And again, this score was tested 4 years ago by the Mayo Group in PBC, and they found that F score was an accurate marker of severe and fibrosis and cirrhosis, and has a strong prognostic value. So what are the results in PSC? And last year, this nice paper from the Tom Carson's group found that the ELF score was able to stratify patients in terms of transplant-free survival in 3 groups, both in a large derivation panel and in a validation panel. And this prognostic value was independent from that of the Mayo score. And there is an external ongoing study for validate these results, and hopefully they will be presented at the next ASLD meeting. And in addition, there was a correlation in this study between FibroScan values and ELF score, and this has been confirmed by recent work from the Birmingham group, but the number of patients was relatively small. And finally, the abdominal imagings, and we know from years that choreographic scores has a prognostic value, and the most popular is the Amsterdam score, developed by Cyril Ponsoy, but it's based on ERCP, endoscopic. So it's an invasive technique, and in most centers, the primary diagnostic modality is MRCP. So what are the data with MRCP? So in the so-called Paris experience, based on nearly 300 3D MRCP, we first developed a standardized interpretation model to score, of course, biliary abnormalities, but also non-biliary features. And we found that after 4 years, a majority of patients worsened in terms of radiological course. Here is the so-called spaghetti plot with individual course. And then we built 2 simple MRI progression risk score, and the unexpected finding that was variables predictive of radiological progression were mainly parenchymal. That means non-biliary, such as dysmorphy, portal hypertension, or parenchymal heterogeneity. But of course, the main question, does it translate into clinical events? And then we studied another cohort of 80 patients, and as shown here, the answer was yes. Patient with a high MRI score did worse than patient with relatively low MRI score. But of course, external validation is required, and I'd like to focus on the need of standardization of scanning interpretation protocols. It's really mandatory, and at this time, more data is needed before being used as a biomarker. But maybe the future is combination of these tools, and here is just an example. So in the same course, we found that combination of FibroScan and MRI improves the stratification into low and high risk groups. So it was a result of MRI score. As expected, FibroScan has also a prognostic value, but a combination of MRI score and FibroScan performed better, as shown here. So to conclude, the good news is that there are new emerging tools. Among these tools, liver stiffness, especially FibroScan and health score, have the best documented potential, but full validation is still pending. And how to go on from there. As already mentioned, we should work on combination of available tools, and in the future to use a big data approach with a transcriptomic, proteomics, and or metabolomics, but require, of course, a large international collaboration with, of course, the help of the patients and their families. So thank you for your attention.